My name is Tom de Ridder. I'm the co-founder of a company called STYLELABS. We built the marketing content hub. And I will talk to you about truths and myths about DAM in the cloud. It's a hot topic today, so welcome everybody. My session will be a little bit technical. It's a tech lab. So let's see, don't run away too soon. At the end of this session, we'll try to answer these 5 questions. We'll make it a little bit interactive, so I'll do some definitions first, and then at the end, I'll ask you an answer to these questions. If nobody answers, I will give the answer myself. So the first question is, does DAM in the cloud equal Saas? Is it the same thing, or is it something different? Is the cloud just another virtualization option? So we all know virtualization in our office, on our machines. Is the cloud just something like that, but on another place? If I go cloud, do I need my IT department? I've worked in marketing a long time, and I know that marketeers don't like ITers and vice versa. So if they could do it without IT, they'd be happy to. So is the cloud an option there? Is the cloud, hot topic nowadays, is the cloud safe and compliant for the enterprise? Safe from security point of view, to not get leakage, to not get hacking, but also from a privacy point of view. And is the cloud more cost effective? Is it cheaper if we go to the cloud or if we buy our own machines? So before we can answer all of these questions, I'm going to have to educate you a little bit. I'm sure some of you will know a couple of these topics, but I'm going to put some definitions out there so we're all on the same page here. So first of all, I went to Wikipedia. So what is the cloud? Wikipedia says the cloud is just a metaphor for the internet. So it's the same thing. Cloud computing is something more elaborate. It's a model or a paradigm where computing resources are offered as a utility. So it's computing resources. It doesn't say applications or something like that. It's typically computing resources offered as a utility. So that's the cloud. So before we can move on, I have to tell you a couple of things about software architecture, because these things are going to be important to understand the difference between cloud and on-premise. So there's, if you buy a software tool and you install it on your servers, the software architecture might be either a vertically scaling architecture or a horizontally scaling architecture. So what's the difference here? Vertically scaling typically means that you can only install it on a single machine and you can only buy a larger machine. Obviously that ends somewhere because you can only buy the biggest machine. I remember at a customer of ours, when we had a vertically scaling database, and SQL Server, for example, is a vertically scaling database, it doesn't scale horizontally, and we bought the biggest machine HP gets, and we can still bring it to its knees. So it has an end. Horizontally scaling is where you can install a software on multiple machines. And if the thing goes slower, you just add more machines. Or if the data grows bigger, you add more machines. You think, yeah, that's the answer to everything. But unfortunately, that comes at a little price in functionality, because you will not have all of the functionality available that you have in a vertical scaling box, in a horizontally scaling box. Think consistency, think replication, think a lot of different things that make horizontally scaling software architectures much more difficult and less functional. But they solve something, and they solve for infinite scale. In the database world, typically the vertical scaling machines are the RDBMS relational databases, and the horizontal scaling machines are the NoSQL, not only SQL kind of databases that we see. And you will see if you compare those two that there is a serious difference in functionality of those two databases. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. Certain applications will need a full RDBMS stack that can only run on vertical scale machines. Other applications, if you're Twitter, it's going to be hard for you to run the whole of Twitter on a single machine. So then you need a model that can scale horizontally. So if we now talk about all of the different layers in a typical software architecture and see whether they scale vertically or horizontally, we have a couple of differences there. So a typical application has 5 layers. So there's the UI, web, or API layer that actually renders out how the interface looks or serves up some JSON, HTTP, RESTful API. That happens typically on web servers. There's the database and search layer. There's the storage layer. There's the processing layer. And there's the messaging layer. Messaging layer is often left out of the picture, but it's a pretty important one if you want to integrate with stuff you need a messaging layer. So, do we scale or not? That is the question here. And this question you can ask to any DAM vendor. If he says we're scaling horizontally, then you should ask, and can you say how you scale horizontally on these 5 layers? Because that will be an interesting topic. So web layers, obviously people will say, yeah, sure, you can add more web servers and you'll put a load balancer in front of that, and we can add 15 web servers, 30, whatever you want. Obviously that will end somewhere if your database doesn't scale. Because you might put up 100 web servers. If the database stops scaling, more web servers are not going to help you there. So database horizontal scaling and search horizontal scaling is also important if you want to scale out. And a lot of the classic systems that we see now in DAM don't scale very horizontally at the database level. So watch out for that, because some people, I'm not going to call names, might say, sure, we can have more web servers, but if the database doesn't follow, you're kind of on your own. I'm not saying you need all this. If you're a small organization, you might be very well with a practical system that scales vertically only, but once you go beyond that, you need a solution. So then the storage layer. Storage layer, typically a file server. Does it scale? You could say, yeah, we install multiple file server and it scales, but you will see that many systems don't play that nice with multiple file servers. So they only need one volume, and you can maybe scale that volume, but it will be difficult to then put a second and a third volume on that. So if we go to the horizontal scaling world, then we're typically ending up at blob storage in cloud worlds, and those systems do scale horizontally, but they're not file systems, so they are not typically SMB systems, and they're approached in a whole different way. So also very tricky there, whether you want to store your files on a local SMB system or on a horizontally scaling cloud system. Then processing. DAM systems need a lot of processing power to do all kinds of stuff, to convert videos, to convert TIFFs into JPEGs, and stuff like that. So does this scale horizontally? So you obviously can buy a machine with a lot of CPU, with a lot of cores, but if you give it 100,000 videos, it will still take time. So best option is that you can obviously distribute the whole processing over multiple machines. Then messaging. Messaging is something that's often forgotten. Messaging is about integration. If something changes in your DAM system, how do you notify other systems that this has changed? So, and if let's say 17 downstream systems are subscribing to your system, how do you make sure that these downstream systems receive the information in time? If there's a 30,000 updates going on in 20 minutes, how do you make sure that 20 minutes later all of these systems get those messages? Because these are some of the requirements that people will have. It cannot take 2 days for all the messaging to get to the downstream system. So also scalable downstream systems, buy a bigger machine or do the whole pub-sub mechanism on a cluster of machines. And we can go into detail on this, but I won't do it now because all of the typical layers have their own specialties. Third slide in software architecture, global distribution. So now that we can scale locally in one data center, what about people at the other side of the world? So if my system is hosted in the US and people from China are downloading, are they going to get to the data fast? Probably not. Because there is a problem of latency and there is a problem of bandwidth. There are all kinds of tricky solutions that download UDP instead of TCP, but in the end, it's all about the available bandwidth. So a lot of systems will try to replicate data around the globe, and then not only files, but maybe also databases. And then there's different systems of replication. You have master-slave, you have master-master. I'm not going into details there, but you will see that it will get only more difficult once you go to master-master fully distributed application, because again, conflict management will come into play. So now that we know all this, let's move on to the, and I have difficulties pronouncing these words because I always say a wrong word. So we'll say IaaS, or somebody who is a native Englishman can learn me how to speak this correctly without laughing. I'll be happy to get that help. So IaaS, PaaS, and Saas. All of the XaaS words, what are they all meaning? So IaaS is infrastructure as a service. I have a nice slide coming up here that explains the difference. PaaS, platform as a service. Saas, software as a service. Three very different things. And I found a nice slide on the internet, and it's not totally readable here, called Pizza as a Service, to explain you the differences in all these layers. So if you look at the on-prem install, that would be the same as making a pizza at home. So typically, I need my own oven, I'm going to do my own dough, I need my own electricity, I need my own dining table, and I need my own fork and knife to do all of this. If we move up a little bit, infrastructure as a service, we're going to rent infrastructure at another place. So it's typically like take and bake a pizza home. You go to Whole Foods, get a prepared pizza, but you still need your own oven to bake it, you still need your own table to eat it. So that's infrastructure as a service. Platform as a service, pizza delivered. You don't need the oven anymore. It's already prepared, but you still need the fork and knife and the table to eat the pizza. And then we go all the way to Saas. This is the same for dining out. You don't need anything anymore, you just need to pay. And that kind of nicely explains. I got this from a guy called Albert Barron, and he wrote a nice article about that on LinkedIn. You can follow that URI to get there. So now if we make this again a little bit more technical and compare it to software architecture. So because it's not always easy, because horizontal scaling doesn't immediately mean cloud. We can also nicely scale horizontally on-prem. So if we are on-premise, then typically our software revision will be a classic software revision. You install software on machines. The provisioning type is going to be, we have our own data center or we install it on our own VMs. And the software architecture can be horizontal, vertical, or even distributed. If you're a very rich company and you have data centers around the world, you can do it all yourself. So there's no cloud here, but it can be distributed, it can be scaling horizontally. So it's a tricky thing to understand. Infrastructure as a service. Typically, it will be the same software installer, classic software installer that you install on virtual machines, because infrastructure as a service just looks like a bunch of VMs, but hosted by somebody else. So virtual machines at a cloud provider can also scale horizontal, vertical, or distributed as you wish. PaaS, we're going to need a revised software stack. You don't just install a Windows installer on a PaaS layer. A PaaS layer, platform as a service, is typically, for example, let me take something at Azure, Azure Search. Azure Search is a search application that you can use, and it uses a RESTful API to interact with the search. And it's an API that is non-available as a software installer. So if you want to use that, you're going to have to tweak your application to be able to talk to that API. So you cannot just install something that you had on a PaaS layer and then expect it to work. You will have to revise your software architecture to make use of this PaaS. Is this PaaS by default horizontally scaled? No. There are a lot of PaaS services. You can buy a SQL PaaS service in Azure. Does it mean it will scale horizontally? No, they haven't cracked their own code. It will still scale vertically, so there will come an end at SQL scaling in PaaS too. So not by default, if you buy a PaaS solution, it will scale. If you buy blob storage, obviously that will scale. If you buy websites, not a web server, but websites, that will scale automatically. So most of the PaaS will scale horizontally, but not everything. Then if you go SaaS, then the whole picture changes. Is SaaS by default cloud? I wouldn't know. Because we've looked at cloud. Cloud was a model to deliver computing utility services remotely. In SaaS, it's not always literally computing services, it's more like we deliver an application remotely. We don't know what the vendor is actually doing. He can run it on his own data center, on virtual machines. It might not even scale, but you might not know. So it could be PaaS. I've seen people that use double SaaS. So they actually source the SaaS solution and then they sell it and they repackage it and they give it to somebody else. So you don't know what's going on actually. So SaaS doesn't immediately mean horizontally scaling and distribution. It might just be an application running on somebody's laptop that is selling it to you as a SaaS solution. So watch out for SaaS. Doesn't equally mean this is distributed and modern and everything. It just means that somebody is selling you a solution which you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So now that we know that table, it's time to answer the questions we had in the beginning. So the first question is, does DAM in the cloud equal SaaS? Is there anybody willing to give a shot at this? Or should I just say the answer here? So obviously the answer is DAM and cloud and SaaS are two different things. SaaS doesn't mean cloud, or cloud doesn't mean SaaS. So typically cloud is highly customizable computing power that you can get remotely as a service, while SaaS is most of the time a one-size-fits-all solution that you just source from a vendor. So two different things, so you cannot compare. So if people say SaaS, are you running in the cloud? Yes, we're SaaS. That's a wrong answer. So it's different things. Remember that. Is cloud just another virtualization option? So your IT department will say, sure, we have VMware. So what's the use of going to the cloud? We can do it all here in our own data center. We have the same things, virtual machines going on. Obviously not, because cloud comes obviously with IaaS VMs, but it also comes with PaaS. And PaaS is something that you cannot simply do on VMware. It also comes with extreme elasticity, meaning beyond your VMware cloud. If you go to if I ask my infrastructure engineer, give me 60 terabytes of data, he will faint probably if he has to do that in his own department. So if I ask it on Azure, I will just get it. So extreme elasticity is there. Also, the cloud has modern APIs. APIs meaning you can provision the machines using an API. So you can talk to the API, you can monitor your solution. If it goes slower, you can fire up a couple of more machines, or you can extend the PaaS layer, or you can scale it back again. So those APIs are typically what makes cloud cloud. Also, there's distribution. Amazon have about 12 edge locations around the world. Azure have about the same number of data centers. So not your local VM where operation is going to run across the globe that easily. So there is a difference there, and you can typically be cheaper there if you have a distributed solution. And also, cloud is typically pay-as-you-go, where VMware will ask you for a upfront license, and not if you fire up another machine, you pay. No, you pay the whole thing upfront, while at cloud level you just pay as you go. So that's the difference. So it's not just another virtualization option. It looks like it, but it's so much more. So do I need my IT department if I go cloud? Obviously yes, because it's still very technical. It still needs to be configured. It still needs to be set up, monitored, backed up, integrated. They have a lot more things they can do now, your IT department. And obviously not every ITer will be, the mindset still has to grow for a lot of ITers. They still like the smell of the servers too much, but that will change over time. But you will still need those people, and many of them have already converted, and more will come. Second question, do I need my IT department if I go SaaS? Until you ask, yeah, but we have this single sign-on solution, you're going to have to talk to your IT department, because they're going to have to set it up with the SaaS, or you want some integrations. So be careful to keep IT out, because after 6 weeks you will need them, and they will probably say something that starts with an F. So don't rule them out too soon. Also, the configuration of a SaaS solution can be sometimes so difficult, even if it's just point and click and all a website. I've seen configuration websites that are more difficult than programming C#, so watch out also for SaaS solutions. So you cannot just rule out the IT people. The more hard questions: is the cloud safe and compliant for the enterprises? Candidates to answer the question. It's a hot topic now in the US. Oh, there's two sides to this. So there's security, like I said, networking, hacking, all of that. And there's privacy. So let's start with the security thing. I have a little story actually on that. A couple of years ago, more like in the Middle Ages, when we were still building websites, or intranets actually, I built an intranet for a customer, and a year later he told us, the intranet doesn't work anymore. I'm like, so what's the error you get? So the error was, the page cannot be displayed. We all know that error. So I asked the guy, are you sure the server, which was in the data center in the cellar, is on? Oh, let me have a look. So 15 minutes later he calls me back. Yeah, we had a break-in at our data center and all servers have been stolen. Including our backups. So, interesting topic there. It's not because you do it yourself that it's more secure. Also, the sheer power of numbers. Amazon, they probably employ 1,000 people to make sure the whole network is safe. Are you sure that your IT organization that has 3 guys can do the same thing? So, I wouldn't be too sure if your IT people say, yeah, but we can make sure it's safer, if that's correct. So watch out for that too. Now, privacy, that's another topic obviously, because we all hear that the governments are tapping in to all of our solutions in the cloud and they know everything we do. So if we start thinking like that, and it might be true for a whole bunch of enterprises, we might just stop doing everything and wear a tinfoil hat. Because then we cannot use our phones anymore too, because they're spying our phones. We cannot use the internet in general anymore. We might just be able to stay in our houses and do nothing there. Obviously, it's a bit of a short answer, but there's talks going on between Microsoft and between the Googles and the government to see what they can and cannot do. But to just rule it out, because it might be spied on, then you have to rule out a whole lot of other stuff too, to be consequent. That's what I'm trying to say here. Is SaaS safe and compliant for the enterprises? That's a whole different story, because with cloud, you might trust organizations like Amazon and Azure, but do you trust organization X, where you've seen one person or not a person at all, that just as a website, and you buy a solution from him and you put all your data on it, and he runs it at home on his laptop? You don't know. So that's a question of trust. You can get all the contracts you want, but if this guy closes his laptop and is gone, everything is gone. So is it safe and compliant for the enterprises? You have to know what you do. And so it's different than cloud, where you might trust the organization more. SaaS is a little bit of a different topic. Last 2 questions. Is it more cost effective? So if you look at it dollar to dollar, you're probably going to get more out of it if you buy your own machines. The power of your own machines will be more cost effective than the cost of the cloud. But then comes the cost of flexibility. Also the IT guy that sleeps next to your machines. So if you compare that, it might be in your case that you're better off buying a single machine because you run a DAM for 50 people and that works and that's more cost effective, then that's fine. But as soon as you need flexibility, you will find yourself in a situation that cloud quickly becomes more cost effective than buying machines. Certainly, those machines age too, so you have to buy new ones every 5 years, and they don't manage themselves. I've seen many of them crash before. So dollar to dollar, yes, but it quickly is a model that is turning. So is SaaS more cost effective than cloud? Is the last question. And that's more of a difficult question because you have to do the math yourself there. SaaS tends to be a little bit more expensive if you look at it in the long run. You might think you can get on a SaaS platform very quick, so time to market is fast. You always get the latest version, but you might see that if you have a lot of users and you work on it for 5 years, then you might be better off buying your own solution and host it in the cloud. So I think it's good to get you going, but if you're serious and if you're a true enterprise, then it might not be the most cost-effective way. You will turn capex into opex, but it might prove you wrong at the end of the year, at the end of 5 years, for example. So you're gonna have to do the math yourself there. Right, that was the last question. So I'm happy to take any questions from you because this was a whole lot of info.
On the top of the enterprises and putting their data in the cloud, are you seeing, say from 5 years ago to today, the attitudes shifting about their comfort level with their data being put, especially if they talk about what borders it crosses, and where do you think it would be, say, a few years from now?
Yeah, so the shift towards cloud has certainly been there in the last 2 years even. The shift towards Saas is something else. So enterprises now are not afraid of AWS and Azure anymore. So they'll buy a solution and they're hosted on AWS themselves. They are still a little bit afraid of a pure SaaS solution, but in my eyes it will eventually shift also. And pricing will go down even more and it will equal out. So I think we're all moving towards cloud and SaaS eventually. And on-prem will probably become something like analog photography. So a couple of people will still do it because it's cool, but the whole world will be going digital. So that's what I think will happen.
So on your question of security and enterprises and guy running something on his laptop, what do you think about source code escrow, backup escrow is open source to if a company fails because you're a small organization, at that point contractually open source the code or any of those sorts of pieces.
So we've seen. I had an account actually at a company that was called Photo something. To upload all my pictures, and they do nice recognition on it, and they backed it up. And then after 1 year, I got an email, sorry, we've run out of funding, so what now? So, okay, is somebody else going to run this? So will they give the source code to somebody else to run it? So they put out the source code on their website, say for the next 3 months you can download the source code if you want to run this, go ahead. Also they allowed everybody to download all of their pictures before they went out of business. So that was a very nice thing to do. Obviously, you don't know, because businesses might go out of business in just a day and then everything is gone. Think Mega Upload, for example. Mega Upload, everybody had their files there. The guy ends up in jail. Nobody reaches their stuff anymore. So you should think of those things before you sign up with a service. Pretty much like in the real world.
First, at the data point, I was talking to someone at Sony, and after the hack, apparently the only thing left standing was on Amazon. I thought that was interesting. All their internal stuff was on top. My question is, if you're dealing with large media files, in the television business we deal with 300 megabyte files now, how does that affect the economics, cloud versus on-prem?
So for storage and bandwidth, because I'm a tech guy, cloud storage will be cheaper than getting your own storage, that's for sure. Also bandwidth, so if you need to get 3 data centers and get a personal upline of gigabits upstream, you want to pay much more than you would pay if you put that all out in the cloud. So that's a given.
Good. Thank you.
That's it. Well, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the show.